Hello. Good morning. What an honor to get to be here and see so many familiar faces. It's exciting just as I walked in, and I know you, and I know you, and I know you. It was really, really good to be back home. So thank you, General President Kelly, for giving me just a few moments to address a couple of things. So we've been a little busy in the overall Biden administration and certainly the U.S. Fire Administration. So I want to tell you just a couple of things that President Biden has done for the fire service and certainly for the U.S. Fire Administration to make the way for us to change the risk environment, to change the environment in which you work, to make things better, safer for you and for the American public as well. You've already heard about what President Biden did with the PSOB Act and the adding PTSD-driven or that leads to death. We all know that means suicide, don't we? That's in rulemaking right now, but the president signed that into law, and that's going to make a difference for us. And as you said, we're still working. This morning, we've talked a lot about cancer and how that needs to be in that PSOB as well. But I want to tell you about a couple of other things. In December, what you may not know is that the president signed a PFAS bill, and that PFAS bill is very, very clear about what needs to be done. USFA is named in that bill. One of the things that we've been charged to do is identify best practices for making sure we can limit your exposure, to educate and develop curriculum to train on those best practices, to catalog those, to make sure that you have reference to the best materials, education materials that you know how to prevent your own exposure as well. We're also to work with NIOSH. You're all familiar with NIOSH and the National Firefighter Cancer Registry, known as the National Firefighter Registry. There's going to be a big launch of that in a couple of weeks. NIOSH is going to launch that, but we're going to work directly with them, as indicated in the PFAS bill, to make sure that not only you get registered, but we are tracking you throughout your careers. And for those retired, it means you too, because we always want to reach back and make sure that we are cataloging your exposures, documenting those exposures along the way. That PFAS bill also says that we are to work with EPA to make sure that we know how to dispose of all of the foam, the AFFF foam that is still out there, that we are finding alternatives, and that we know how to dispose of that, and the gear, of course, that we've got to get rid of once we have the alternative. You see, there's a lot of things already in work. Another thing that the president signed in December, which has a huge impact on the USFA, is House Bill 7077. You may not be familiar with that, but that bill gave the USFA authority to investigate large-scale fires. Now, how did that happen? Well, you might remember just over a year ago, in what we call now the Bronx fire, there was a high-rise public housing fire in which 17 people perished. And it wasn't the direct impingement of the fire that caused their deaths. You see, nobody on the fire floor died. Everybody that died in that high-rise public housing were up on the 15th on higher floors. How did they die? From smoke. Smoke movement through a building that had limited HVAC dampers, that had no self-closing doors, that had no insulation. You see, these are ways that the building fails, and you all have seen it. How the building fails long before you arrive. And this is what this bill will allow us to do. It gives us new investigative authority, not for cause and origin. That's your state fire marshals, it's your local fire marshals, it's the ATF. This is for fire safety investigation. When we have a major fire, when we have something as a remarkable fire, what does that mean? Well, that's the large warehouses, that's your energy storage systems, these things that are not normal in your environment, your working environment, that cause extended risk to you when you arrive. Fire's fast, you know that, and it's getting faster because of the things that we have in our homes, the things that we have in our businesses, the things that we have in these remarkable, if you will, warehouses and the way that things are stored and all the cardboard boxes with extra wax. all our fuel load that you are going to encounter. And scenarios where you've not been trained necessarily on the robotics in that big warehouse that is shipping orders. And yet, it falls on you and your responsibility if something goes badly. That's what this bill is about, is to make sure that we have the power to go in and investigate these kinds of scenarios, and then turn and look at how many other buildings like that are across the country, so that we can better hone in our fire safety messages. So that bill is going to be key. One more bill I want to tell you about that the President recently signed, just in December. December was like Fire Service Month, by the way, as the President signed so many bills. The other one was about tamper-resistant smoke alarms in public housing. Now, why does that matter? I just told you about the Bronx fire. How many of you have public housing in your jurisdictions that were built prior to 1992 Fire Safety Act? Almost all of you, whether you know it or not. And those were not required to be retrofitted with sprinkler systems. And we have almost 600,000 of those throughout the country. Well, what this bill does is say no more. If there's public housing, you must have tamper-resistant. If it's not hardwired, then it must be tamper-resistant smoke alarms. So these bills make the environment not only for the people living in these places, but for you as you make entry. We just said fire is fast. You're not able to get there fast enough because of the fuel loads and because of the things that are in our homes and businesses. Fire is fast. And one of the things that I tout a lot in this space is that safe and affordable housing should not be mutually exclusive. And yet it still is today. So we have a long way to go in the USFA and standing with you. And I want to recognize just for a moment that since I've been in this spot, I have asked the leaders of the National Fire Service organizations to come together. And we had a conversation about whether or not we could all stand together with one voice. And I got to tell you, President Kelly was the first one to step up. He said, absolutely, we're in. What do we do? And so we held the first Summit on Fire Prevention and Control last October. And President Biden showed up. He was there virtually with us, live, spoke to people in the audience, and it made a difference because it coalesced the nation's fire service leaders like they haven't been in many, many years. We are now talking about speaking across the fire service with one voice. We've formed a national strategy that's not too different than your strategy that you're going on the Hill with tomorrow. That strategy says that we're going to address wildfire. We're going to address the threats of wildfire in the interface. And you notice I said wildfire, not wildland fire. That's on purpose. Wildland is a location. The interface is a location. The intermixed communities are a location. Suburban, location. Wildfire is the entity we're concerned about. And we're concerned about you having appropriate training in that space. We're also concerned about recruitment. I suspect many of your departments are having recruitment issues, just like others across the nation. You're getting mandatory a lot, aren't you? Yeah, because we have to address the recruitment issue. Post-COVID, we can't keep up. And so we are addressing that as the nation's fire service. Also, cancer. President Kelly was the first to sit at that round table with national decision makers and talk about firefighter cancer and how we have to change the trajectory of cancer. Behavioral health is another of our strategies. Not just continuing to talk about PTSD and not just continuing to talk about suicide, although that's important. But if we don't do something on the front end of that, we're not going to change the back end. We have to figure out how to introduce resilience, mental resilience in our people. Not just all of you, but our new recruits, those who have been on the job. We need to build mental resilience. And I know the IAFF has been on the front lines of that. We've watched our military be on the front lines of that. That must continue. And finally, our building codes and standards. You see, if we can create a safer environment for people to live and work, then it's a safer environment when it goes badly for you to respond. And so our building codes and standards, not just at the national level, but as we translate those to the state and the local, I know that we've got a lot that are adopted, but are they being consistently put in place across the nation, and are you given the authority to enforce them? And in many cases, you're not. And even if you have the authority, you don't have enough people, do you? So this is what we are focused on, is the nation's fire service. And I want to thank again President Kelly for leading that charge, for standing with the other national organizations to come together and speak with one voice about what we are doing as the fire service. So I'm grateful for this opportunity to serve under the Biden-Harris administration. I'm grateful to the President for allowing me to stand with you and lead the nation's fire service. Thanks again for the time this morning. I look forward to talking with you throughout the day. Thank you.